No fake, no fake stuff. No fake AI stuff. No fake AI interviews. No fake AI readings. Welcome back to Lighting the Void. If you're listening live or listening on the recording, we're going to get back into the famous text of Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. I'm going to put this back up here, this image. There we go. All right. So, like I said, one of the reasons why we're doing this is to set the record straight and to be able to absorb the text and all of the little, there's so many little things in this book that get passed up that are freaking amazing for this guy's experience. And I think honestly, if we're being honest with ourselves, this guy's experience was one of the experiences that changed the game for conscious explorers, for all of us. So we're going to try to jump in. We're going to knock this stuff out, but not too quickly because we want to try to absorb some of it. What's up, Dutchie? My brother. Always in the corner over there, Dutchie. He's a good man. All right, so the chapter 2 is search and research. What does one do when faced with the unknown? Turn away and forget about it. In this case, 2 factors negated that possibility. One was nothing more than curiosity. The second, how can one forget or ignore an elephant in the living room, or more to the point, a ghost in the bedroom? On the other side of the scale were the conflicts and anxieties, very real, very disturbing. There was no question that I was deeply afraid of what might happen to me if this, quote, condition continued. I was much more concerned about the possibility of a growing mental illness than a physical deterioration. There's probably been a time in all of our lives when we were worried if we were going crazy or not, right? I had studied enough psychology and had enough psychologists and psychiatrist friends to compound such fears. And moreover, I was afraid to discuss the matter with these friends. I was afraid that I would then be classified as their patients and lose the closeness that equality or that normalcy brings. Non-professional friends in business and community would be worse. I would be labeled a freak or psychotic, which could seriously affect my life and the lives of those close to me. Oh, Robert Monroe didn't want to be labeled as a freak, did he? But finally, it seemed to be something to keep from my family. It seemed unnecessary that they worry along with me. It was only the definite need to explain odd actions that forced the disclosure to my wife. She accepted it reluctantly because there was no other real choice, and thus she became a worried witness to incidents and even much in contradiction to her religious training. She didn't have any choice. Oh, Robert Monroe, I don't know how to take that sentence. You know what he's saying? Like, well, she really didn't have any choice. Of course she did. What are you talking about? The children were then much too young to understand. Later, the matter became complacent to them, and away at college, my older daughter reported that after she and her roommate had looked around the empty dorm room one night, she said, "Daddy, if you're here, I think you better go now. We want to get undressed for bed." Actually, I was 200 miles away at the time, both physically and otherwise. I wonder what Robert Monroe's like children were thinking, you know, or like not her children, but her children's friends. If you know, like his daughter's at college, he's like, "Oh, by the way, my dad gets out of body and he comes over here and sometimes he checks on me," and it's I don't know. That's pretty crazy. What's up, Huey P. Burrito? Well, that's a hell of a handle. What's up, Jenny? Dan, Nancy? What's happening? Glad to have you here. Gradually, I became more accustomed to this strange addition in my life, and more I was slowly able to control its movements. In a few ways, it had actually become helpful. I had become reluctant to part with it. The mystery of its very presence had aroused my curiosity, and even after I had determined that there was no physiological cause, and that I was no more insane than most of my fellow men, the fears persisted. It was a defect, illness, or deformity that had to be hidden from normal people. There was no one to talk to about the problem other than the occasional meeting with Dr. Bradshaw. The only other solution seemed to be some form of psychotherapy, but a year or 5 or 10 of daily interviews costing thousands of dollars with no promised results didn't seem very efficient. It was very lonely in those early days. Finally, I began to experiment with this strange aberration, keeping notes of each event. I also began to read in areas of study long neglected in my life pattern. Religion had not greatly influenced my thinking, yet it seemed that this was the only remaining body of writings and knowledge of man in which I could look for answers. Beyond childhood church-going and rare attendance with a friend, God and church and religion had meant little to me. In fact, I hadn't given the matter much thought one way or the other, as it simply didn't evoke my interest. In my superficial reading of past and present Western philosophies and religions, I found vague references and generalities, Some seem to fit as somebody's attempt to describe or explain similar incidents. Biblical and Christian writings offered many of these, all without specific causes or cures. Yeah, I remember, I don't know if it's John or Elijah. I have to look it up, but there are parts in the Bible when they have those like visions or whatever, and they even say whether I was in the body or out of the body, I don't know. They say that. So. The best advice seemed to be to pray, meditate, fast, go to church, absolve my sins, accept the Trinity, believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, resist evil or resist not evil, and give myself to God. All of this did nothing but add to the conflict. If this new thing in my life was good or a gift, then it evidently belonged to saints, or at least saintly types, according to religious history. I felt that qualification for sainthood was certainly above and beyond me, and if this new thing was evil, then it was the work of the devil, or at the least of a demon trying to possess or dispossess me, and should be exorcised. Oh man, he was going through a lot, wasn't he? Thinking about all this stuff. The Orthodox ministers of organized religion whom I met politely accepted the latter view to varying degrees, and I got the feeling I was dangerous and heretical in their eyes, and they were wary. And look, anytime you go to Orthodox Christians, no offense to Orthodox Christianity, I think it's a beautiful religion, but their fixation on everything being a demon is a bit neurotic, if you ask me. I don't even know if that's the right word for it. So, in the Eastern erotic, did I say erotic or neurotic? My brain just said erotic for some reason, but I think I said neurotic. Anyways, I don't know, sorry. In the Eastern religions, I found more acceptance of the idea. As Dr. Bradshaw had indicated, there was much talk of the existence of a non-physical body. Again, such a condition of being was the product of great spiritual development. Only masters or gurus and other long-trained holy men had the ability to leave their physical bodies temporarily to achieve indescribable mystical insights. There were no details and no pragmatic explanation of what was meant by spiritual development. Implied was that in the practices of secret cults and sects and lamissaries, etc., such details were common knowledge. If this were true, what or who was I? Certainly too old to start life anew in a Tibetan monastery, and the loneliness became acute. Evidently there were no answers, not in our culture. It was at this point that I discovered the existence of an underground in the United States. Oh boy. Listen to this. You're probably part of this underground. The only factor missing is that no laws exist against its function, nor is there official persecution and prosecution involved. This underground only occasionally intermingles in part with the worlds of business, science, politics, academia, and so-called arts. And furthermore, it definitely is not limited to the United States, but infiltrates all of Western civilization. Many people may have heard of it vaguely or casually, have come in contact with it, and passed it off as just people with queer ideas. For one thing is usually certain, members of this underground who are respected in their communities don't talk about the interest or beliefs that they qualify them for membership unless they know you two are in the club. I guess back in the day, anyways, it was probably a lot weirder back in the day for this, in the, I want to say 70s, 60s, 70s. They have learned from experience that to be outspoken brings censure from their ministers, customers, employees, or even friends. And I suspect the membership may run into millions if all would admit to their qualification. They are found in all walks of life: scientists, psychiatrists, physicians, housewives, college students, businessmen, teenagers, and at least a few ministers and formal religions. This group meets all the qualifications of an underground movement. They gather in small groups quietly and often semi-secretly. The events are often publicly announced, but you have to be with it before you can understand the notice. The participants usually discuss affairs of the underground only with other members, and other than family or close friends who are probably also members, the community doesn't know of the secret interest in life of the underground member. If you asked him, he would deny such membership because often he doesn't realize he really is associated. All are, to some degree, emotionally and intellectually dedicated to a cause. And finally, the underground has its own literature, language, technology, and, to some extent, demigods. At the moment, this underground is highly disorganized, and in my opinion, it still is. That's me saying that, right? In fact, there is no organization whatsoever in the usual sense of the word. Rarely, even have the local groups gone so far as to adopt a title or name for themselves. Yeah, I call them void walkers, but that's just a weird nickname because I can't think of anything else. And so far, they are simply small but regular gatherings held in someone's living room or a bank conference room or quite possibly a church rectory. And this group of individuals is groping in the dark and seems to take many diverse pathways, yet the goal is the same for all. However, like other kinds of underground movements, if you have become a member and you visit another city, you inevitably meet other members. It isn't planned, it just happens. And he put happens in quotation marks. Who comprises this underground? First are the professionals. At one end are the parapsychologists, very few in number. And these are men who have legitimate doctorates from recognized universities who have publicly conducted research into ESP. The most well-known of these is Dr. J.B. Rhine, formerly of Duke University, who conducted and compounded simple statistical probability card test for some 30 years. To his satisfaction, he proved statistically that ESP is fact. His results are looked upon dubiously and for the most part unacceptably by the majority of psychologists and psychiatrists in the United States. There are others in the same category. Andrea Puhiarch, is that Puhiarch? Sorry, Andrea. J.G. Pratt, Robert Crookall, Hornet Hart, Gardner Murphy, all come under this classification. If you are a member, these are familiar names. The professional spectrum runs the gamut, from the parapsychologist to the roadside palmist who claims to be a gypsy or a New Delhi Indian, and who charges $5 for a quick 5-minute stock reading. Areas of interest are quite diverse, but all have interconnecting bonds of common belief in one way or the other. The mass underground looks to the professionals for information and guidance and gives them something akin to hero worship, which we've talked about on this show a little bit. Anyone who writes a book, organizes a foundation, conducts research, has a major experience, studied with a great professional, gives psychic readings, conducts classes in mind and or soul development, heals by faith, is an accredited astrologer, minister of divine science or spiritualism, trance medium, outer space saucer devotee, hypnotist. These are all the professionals. He's lumping all of these people in the underground. Not an insult at all, by the way. Most derive all or part of their income from this activity. Many have deep professional jealousy for each other and often are inclined to be suspicious of techniques and theories propounded outside their particular activity. They may even subtly deride or look with tolerant superior amusement as results unrelated to their specialty. This could well explain why, as of now, there is no organization in the underground. Yet in spite of themselves, the professionals they're all drawn to one another. Their common interest forces this. There are no others with whom they can share their thoughts and experiences as equals and with understanding. This is not in any way intended to cast aspersions or discredit upon the professionals. They're a completely fascinating and wonderful group of people. Each in his own way, whatever it may be, is seeking after truth. What a dull world it would be without them once you have become a member of the underground. For the underground consumer, there are magazines, newspapers, lectures, book clubs. At least 50 new underground books are published each year, many by top houses, and even TV and radio programs. The latter, evidently put together by overeager members, have not been successful because the underground is still very much a minority group. The basic public reaction is, quote, "You don't really believe in that stuff, do you?" End quote. Who then makes up the mass of this underground? Contrary to what one might expect, they are not merely a conglomerate of silly, uneducated, superstitious, unreasoning misfits. True, some of the like are included, but at no greater percentage than is found in the general population. As a matter of fact, if it could be surveyed, it is quite probable that their average IQ would be far above that of the general cross-section of Western humanity. By the way, have any of you guys that listen to this broadcast, I would ask you to take 3 or 4 different IQ tests and then measure that IQ test against the average of the United States. It might shock you, actually. What's up, MJ? Ari. What's up, Delina? What's happening, April? John E. Jen, what's happening? It's just interesting. He's got a point about this. The common bond or cause that draws them together is simple. All have a belief that, 1, man's inner self is neither understood nor fully expressed in our contemporary society, and 2, this inner self has capabilities to act and perform mentally and materially to a degree unknown and unrecognized by modern science. These are people whose prime avocation is to read, talk, think, discuss, and participate in anything psychic or spiritual. This is all that is needed for membership, and perhaps you're in the club and didn't realize it. How do these people get that way? The most common answer is to experience or be a part of some phenomenon that cannot be explained by modern scientific, philosophic, or religious teachings. One type of person just shrugs it off, sweeps it under the rug, and forgets about it. The other, who eventually becomes a member, tries to find some answers. I qualified for membership because I couldn't find any other source of information. Unfortunately, the information I was looking for was very sparse indeed, even in the strange new old world. But at least there were those who seriously considered the possibility that the second state could and did happen. It soon became apparent that the underground started more than 100 years ago, or earlier, when present-day science began to organize man's concepts and rid them of unreasoning, unsupported, quote, knowledge. In such efforts to purify anything that did not or had not yet met the test of empiricism was ruthlessly discarded by intellectual leadership. And I will tell you guys that that's how a lot of religious texts came about too. Those who continued to hold any of the discarded beliefs fell into disrepute. And if they stubbornly persisted and had still wished to be active and accepted in society, they had no choice but to go underground with their secret ideas while maintaining another image publicly, and many who refused to practice this deceit became martyrs. Yeah, and that is the story of lots of secret societies that everybody's afraid of. Just because they simply couldn't talk about these things in the public for too long, or, certain things would happen, not just to them, but anybody that associated with them. So to date, in this enlightened society, the same attitude still exists to a very great extent. Of the professionals who are known by their fellows as proponents of parapsychology or anything similar, there may be 5 who still command admiration and respect publicly from their profession, be it medicine, psychology, psychiatry, or the physical sciences. But at this stage, I believe I have met all 5, and sadly, I'm a little wiser through no fault of theirs. They just don't know much about the second state or second body. Dude, and that's what I've been saying. Like, anybody that's had even the remotely slightest real out-of-body experience can kind of tell, like, other people that haven't had it, or they just, it's not that they could have it. It's some kind of belief that just keeps them from not having it. It's hard to explain. But most of all, I enjoy the people I have met in the underground. Me too. I found them in small towns, big cities, in business, in church groups, and universities, and even in the American Psychiatric Association. As a rule, they are truly gentle people. They are jolly. He's talking about you, I think, a little bit. They are jolly with a warm sense of humor. They are a happy group who can laugh when necessary at their own serious interest, and whether intentionally or not, they are the most altruistic and empathetic cross-section of humanity I have ever known. It must be no accident that they are the most religious in the true sense of the word. Now, if this appears to be a curt dismissal of all other sources and material uncovered in the, quote, psychic writings available, it is not so intended. Each has its own version of truth, and perhaps there are indeed many truths. I've sat in seances with trance mediums and asked definite questions, received vague answers, which were to me pure evasions when a straightforward reply would have meant so much. Yeah, me too. I'll admit that too. You ever took part in a seance and then asked the person that was doing it like a real specific question, and it just is, you get this vague, and you're like, yeah, all right. Yet later, to my astonishment, in one such case, I participated in a second body experiment that verified to me and others the authenticity of this medium's ability. Truth here is truly a mystery. The work of Edgar Cayce, virtually a Latter-day Saint in the psychic world, was without doubt most evidential and well investigated, but unbelievable in terms of present-day science and medicine. That's another guy we got to get into in this broadcast, like deeply into. Most definitely, here was truth unfolding, and history may not record it, except in some dim archives. Today, some 20 years after his death, no more is known as to how his ability worked and what it was than on the day he died. Casey's readings were helpful, but are exceedingly difficult to bring into concrete focus as they relate to second state existence. He confirmed it, but did not explain, and much of his material in this area is clouded by the haze of a strong religious conditioning. Yeah, he was a big-time Christian, too. This leaves it open to interpretation. So Casey's translations, or translators, or, quote, ministers, have sprung up to provide such intercession for him. There are others even now who evidently can perform similarly to Casey. One gave quite accurate physical reports of me and provided some general data on my second state activities which were neither enlightening nor provable. They did convince me of the validity of her ability by all means. Again, another truth to me and others who participated, but no direct answers that could be used in a court of law. Several psychics performed life readings for me. They included wide generalizations, but were unable to give direct, straightforward answers to simple questions. If genuine, and who am I to say they are not, these psychics must be definitely limited in their specific perception. Either that or they suffer problems in translation from symbols to articulation. But I can well appreciate how this latter might occur. It was in my readings and contacts with this branch of human thought I fondly called the underground, that I finally found strong glimmerings of what was happening to me. If I hadn't been involved personally, I would not have believed what I found. At the same time, it was comforting to discover that I was not unique. What was it all about? Well, simply, I was performing, quote, astral projection. Dr. Bradshaw had given me the clue, although he himself had heard about such things only remotely. Astral projection to the uninitiated is a term given to the technique of leaving one's physical body temporarily and moving about in a non-material or astral body. Many connotations have been given the word astral and many interpretations, scientific and otherwise. The word scientific is used cautiously because the modern scientific world in the West, at least, neither recognizes nor is seriously aware of even the possibility of such things. In the obscure history of mankind, it is an entirely different matter. The word astral has dim origins in early mystical and occult events which involve witchcraft, sorcery, incantations, and other seeming foolishness which modern man looks upon as silly and superstitious nonsense. As no attempt was made to delve deeply into this area, I still don't know what the word astral means. Thus, I prefer to stick to the terms second body or second state. The type of literature which still flourishes depicts an astral world composed of many levels or planes, which is where people go when they die. And the person who travels around in his astral body can make short visits to these places, talk with dead people, participate in activities there, and come back to the physical body apparently none the worse for wear. But there have been times when I have frequently hoped or prayed for the latter to be true. In order to perform this miraculous feat, one had to be arduously trained, or better still, spiritually developed. That's in quotations too, according to occultists. These teachings have supposedly been handed down secretly through history to enlighten those who had become advanced enough to receive them. Now, evidently, from time to time, there were those who revealed the secret or accidentally learned the technique. Whoopsie. I think that's happened to some of us, hasn't it? What's up, Sudi? Pound Town, what's happening, man? Shay Bright, what's going on? Yeah, in order to perform, blah, 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 lost my spot. I hate when I do that. These teachings have supposedly been handed down, blah, blah, blah. Evidently, from time to time, there were those who received this accidentally learned the technique. Yeah. And in the past, they have been canonized, castigated, cremated, laughed at, and locked up for such public revelation. This doesn't make the future seem very promising in my case. Paradoxically, much of the data contained in my notes tends to confirm this occult approach to the subject, which came as quite a shock. See, here's a sentence that after so many readings of this book, I passed right up because of the, quote, ADD part of my brain. Paradoxically, much of the data contained in my notes tends to confirm this occult approach to the subject, which came as quite a shock. Using liberal interpretation and translation into the modern idiom, much of it fell nearly into place, and also much was left unsaid, although I do not know why. According to the literature of the psychic underground, the religious mystical history of man constantly makes reference to the second body. Long before Christianity and the Bible appeared, cultures in Egypt, India, and China, to name a few, held the second body idea as standard operating procedure. Historians have found these references again and again, but evidently consign them to the mythology of the times. So if one reads the Bible from this point of view, the belief is confirmed many times in both the Old and New Testaments. In the Catholic Church are found consistent reports of saints and other religious figures having such experiences, some of them willfully. Even in Protestants, devout followers have reported the out-of-body experience during some of their religious ecstasy. In the Orient, the concept of a second body has long held a natural and accepted position of reality. Again, this is an entire study in itself, and there are numerous underground books and authorities on the Oriental cultures that affirm the concept of a second body. There's supposed to be in existence today those adepts or lamas, monks, gurus, and the like who exercise mental and physical powers, including second body activity, that are completely at odds with present scientific knowledge. Largely, these have been ignored in our materialistic society because they can't be duplicated in the laboratory. In the files of various psychic research organizations here and abroad, there are hundreds of case history reports of out-of-body experiences, and such reports go back at least 100 years, and many more are found in various writings of the past. They are there for anyone who wishes to investigate the phenomenon. Virtually all of such reported experiences are spontaneous, one-time only events, and usually they have come at a time when the individual was either physically ill or debilitated, or during an intense emotional crisis. All seem to be highly subjective, yet the great mass of these reports is evidential in itself. And during this century, several impressive collections of these experiences have been published and should be required reading if one pursues the subject. You guys think that, according to Robert Monroe, that we went through the required reading? You know, I'm starting to realize, like, when I ask people, like, man, have you ever, like, read Robert Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body? Like, I realize why now, because the first, I'd say 4 chapters are just him, like, he's just going through all this mental stuff before he really gets into the depth and the meat of the experiences in the story. But it's good. The weakness in all of them is apparent. Most are basically reportorial supplemented by conjecture. No specifics based upon direct examination or experimentation are included. Reason, evidently, there have been no such solid research performed. In very rare instances, there are published records of individuals who could deliberately and willfully induce the second state and move about in their second body. And there may be more, but only 2 stand out in recent history. If others have and are performing this act, they have kept the results to themselves. The first of these is Oliver Fox, an Englishman who was active in psychic research and practices. He published fairly detailed reports of out-of-body experiences and techniques for achieving this state, except in the underground of 1920. His work received little attention, yet he very definitely attempted to bring the experience into the framework of understanding of his era. Well, we got to get into some Oliver Fox because I never read that guy's. The second and most well-known was Sylvan Muldoon. Yeah, we read that one. Who published several works on the subject in collaboration with Hereward Carrington over the period of 1938 to 1951. Muldoon was the projectionist, and Carrington was a consistent researcher in psychic phenomena. To date, their books have been the classics in the field and offer interesting reading. In my after-the-fact investigation, I again wondered at much that obviously had been omitted. Also, little or no empirical experimental tests were made to provide data for a serious yet objective investigator. The most recent has been a book by the author Yram, Y-R-A-M, a woman, or is this Mary backwards? It too offered several clues, but no solid continuity relating to my case. And significant attempts at scientific study and evaluation have been made recently by several noteworthy men such as Hornell Hart, Nander Fodor, Robert Crookall, and others with good academic backgrounds. Most of these are relatively free of the distorting factors present in so much of the underground literature, and their titles will be found along with other recent publications in this bibliography. All serve to verify the fact of the existence of the second body, but bring forth no concrete data at the experimental, non-philosophic level. Again, how can one discuss experiments that have not taken place? The most consistent problem encountered in associating with the underground has been to avoid submergence of the analytical approach and the vast morass of theological thought and belief. Once, not too long ago, man thought electricity was God. Yeah, we talked about this before. And before that, the sun, lightning, and fire. But our sciences told us that these ideas were ridiculous and tried to show us through experimentation. Perhaps the second body operating in the second state can provide the quantum jump to prove God empirically. Then there will be no more underground. The psychic underground provided me with many new friends, but few specific answers to such questions as, what do I do now? To my surprise, they looked to me for answers. There appeared to be only one remaining path to take. Hundreds of experiments spread over 12 years, and still continuing, have brought forth conclusions that seem inescapable, yet alien to my environmental conditioning. In the material to come, the test will be yours. So that's chapter 2. So let me ask you guys a question. Most of us would be considered what he's called in this underground. And what he says is, the psychic underground provided me with new friends, but few specific answers to such questions as, what do I do now? And then to his surprise, they look to him for answers. Now, how often, and this is kind of a rhetorical question, but how often do you think that happens, even to this day? Is it still that way? I think it is. I know it is, right? All right. So, on the evidence, let's see, where were we at? I gotta get a drink real quick, right? I mean, like, I think that whole chapter was basically him saying, look, I tried to find real analytical evidence of the truth here, and I made friends in the underground world of truth seekers, and here's all the people, and this is how they are, and this is how they treated me, and yet I still have the same questions. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so in the fall of 1964, an interesting meeting was held one evening in Los Angeles. It was composed of some 20 assorted psychiatrists, psychologists, scientists, and myself. It was a most rewarding evening. The purpose of this meeting was to examine with sincerity and seriousness the experiences and experiments which have been considered herein. After several hours of interrogation by the group, it was my turn, and I asked 2 simple questions of each of them. If you were going through what I have been experiencing, what would you do? It was the definite opinion of the majority, more than 2/3, that every effort should be made to continue such experimentation in the hope of enlightening and expanding man's knowledge of himself. Several, half, seriously stated that I should run, not walk to the nearest psychiatrist, but none of them would offer their services. The second question I asked them: would you personally take part in experiments that would lead to the creation of such unusual activity in yourself? That's another question you got to ask yourself, right? Here the pattern changed somewhat. About half stated their willingness to participate, and oddly in this group were some of those who were most skeptical of the reality of such experiences. Of course, this gave me the opportunity to nudge gently those who were in favor of continued experiments. When it came to the dive into the cold, strange waters, let someone else do it. Yeah, I get that. When it comes to the dive into the void, most people are like, yeah, you go do that. Let me know how it goes, right? And in many ways, I don't blame them. If presented to me 12 years ago, I doubt that I would have volunteered. Why did the group bother to assemble? Curiosity, perhaps, or again, it may have been some of the evidential material that had been accumulated. I hope the latter. Here are some of the key reports of the notes which aroused their interest. September 10th, 1958. In the afternoon. Again, I floated upward with the intent of visiting Dr. Bradshaw and his wife. Realizing that Dr. Bradshaw was ill in bed with a cold, I thought I would visit him in his bedroom, which was a room I had not seen in his house, and if I could describe it later, could thus document my visit. Again came the turning in the air, the dive into the tunnel, and this time the sensation of going uphill. Dr. and Mrs. Bradshaw lived in a house some 5 miles from my office up a hill. I was over trees, and there was a light sky above, and momentarily I saw, in the sky, maybe, a figure of a rounded human form, seemingly dressed in robes and a headpiece on his head. An oriental concept remains, sitting arms in lap, perhaps cross-legged a la Buddha. Then it faded. I don't know the meaning of this, and after a while the uphill travel became difficult, and I had the feeling that the energy was leaving, and I felt that I wouldn't make it. With this thought, an amazing thing happened. It felt precisely if someone had placed a hand under each arm and lifted me, and I felt a surge of lifting power, and I rushed quickly up the hill, and then I came upon Dr. and Mrs. Bradshaw. They were outside the house, and for a moment I was confused, as I had reached them before I got to the house. I didn't understand this because Dr. Bradshaw was supposed to be in bed. Dr. Bradshaw was dressed in light overcoat and hat, and his wife in a dark coat and all dark clothes. They were coming towards me, so I stopped. And they seemed in good spirits and walked past me unseeing, in the direction of a smaller building like a garage, Brad trailing behind as they walked. I floated around in front of them, waving, trying to get their attention, without result, and then with turning his head, I thought I heard Dr. Bradshaw say to me, "Well, I see you don't need my help anymore." Thinking I had made contact, I dove back into the ground, and he has a question mark, like he doesn't really know if it was the ground, and returned to the office, rotated into the body, and opened my eyes. Everything was just as I had left it. The vibration was still present, but I felt I had enough for one day. So right there, he's telling you everything was just as I had left it. So he goes out and has this experience, and then he feels the vibration even when he comes back to his body, which he's saying, because the vibration is there, I could probably get back out of body if I wanted, but I had enough for the day. Important aftermath. So we phoned Dr. and Mrs. Bradshaw that evening. I made no statement other than to ask where they were between 4 and 5 that afternoon. My wife, upon hearing of the visit, said flatly it was not possible, could not be so, because Dr. Bradshaw was home in bed sick. With Mrs. Bradshaw on the phone, I asked the simple question, and she stated that roughly at 4:25, they were walking out of the house towards the garage. She was going to the post office, and Dr. Bradshaw had decided that perhaps some fresh air might help him, and had dressed and gone along. She knew the time by back-checking from the time they arrived at the post office, which was 20 minutes to 5. It takes roughly 15 minutes to drive to the post office from their house. I'd come back from my trip to them at approximately 4:27. I asked what they were wearing. Mrs. Bradshaw stated she was wearing black slacks and a red sweater, which was covered with a black car coat. Dr. Bradshaw was wearing a light hat and a light-colored top coat. However, neither saw in me in any way or were aware of my presence. Dr. Bradshaw had no memory of saying anything to me. The great point is that I had expected to find him in bed and didn't. The coincidences involved were too much. It was not important to prove this to anyone else, only to me. And it proves to me, truly for the first time, that there might well be more than this normal science and psychology and psychiatry allow, more than an aberration, trauma, or hallucination. And I needed some form of proof more than anyone else. I'm sure it is a simple incident, but unforgettable. Yeah. I mean, so he was right about the clothes, right? He was right about the clothes. He was right about what they were doing. I would assume that when Dr. Bradshaw said, well, I guess you don't need my help anymore, he's probably talking to his wife or something. And then Robert Monroe probably thought he was talking to him. In this visit to Dr. Bradshaw and his wife, the time of visit coincides with the physical event. The auto-suggestion hallucination factor is negative. I expected to find Dr. Bradshaw in bed in the house, but did not do so and was puzzled by the inconsistency. Identical reports with conditions of actual events. 1. Location of Dr. Bradshaw and his wife. 2. Position of the two relative to each other. 3. The actions of the two. 4. Wearing apparel of the two. All the stuff he saw. Possibly of unconscious pre-knowledge through the earlier observation of the above. 1. Negative. Had no information of their change in plans or time of habits to the post office. 2. Indeterminate. Consciously at least unaware of who walks first. 3. Negative. Would have no pre-knowledge of their walking across to the garage in such fashion. 4. Indeterminate. May have observed both in similar dress, but expected to find only one Dr. Bradshaw in bedclothes. So you see how this is his actual notes, how he's notating things, just to make sure, this is the stuff that I know for sure that I got right. And here, when he says this word, possibility, or this sentence, possibility of unconscious pre-knowledge through earlier observation. What he means by that is we go out and observe things and our unconscious takes it in, and then later, if we get it right, we think it's some deja vu thing or something, but we already kind of were there. We unconsciously took it in, unknowingly took it in. So he's trying to rule that out, which I respect. I'd like to have 1 hour Me too, man. What's up, Ava? Okay, March the 5th, 1959, in the morning. In a motel in Winston-Salem, I woke up early and went out to have breakfast at 7:30. I then returned to my room about 8:30 and laid down. As I relaxed, the vibrations came and then an impression of movement. And shortly thereafter, I stopped, and the first thing I saw was a body walking along and tossing a baseball in the air and catching it. A quick shift, and I saw a man trying to put something into the back seat of a car, a large sedan. The thing was an awkward-looking device that I interpreted to be a small car with wheels and electric motor. The man twisted and turned the device and finally got into the back seat of the car and slammed the door. Another quick shift, and I was standing beside a table. There were people sitting around the table, and dishes covered it. One person was dealing what looked like white large playing cards, around to the others at the table. I thought it strange to play cards at a table so covered with dishes and wondered about the overlarge size and whiteness of the cards. Another quick shift, and I was over city streets, about 500 feet high, looking for a home. And then I spotted the radio tower and remembered that the motel was close to the tower, and almost instantly I was back in my body. I sat up and looked around, and everything seemed normal. Important aftermath. The same evening, I visited some friends, Mr. and Mrs. Agnew Bonson, at their home. You can tell he's making these names up, kind of, right? They were partially aware of my activities, and on a sudden hunch, I knew the morning event had to do with them. I asked about their son, and they called him into the room and asked him what he was doing between 8:30 and 9 that morning. He said I was going to school, but when asked more specifically what he was doing as he went, he said, well, he was tossing his baseball in the air and catching it. Although I knew him well, I had no knowledge that the boy was interested in baseball, although this could be assumed. Next, I decided to speak about the loading of the car. Mr. Bonson was astounded. Exactly at the same time, he told me he was loading a Van de Graaff generator into the back seat of his car. The generator was a large, awkward device with wheels, an electric motor, and a platform. He showed me the device, and it was eerie to see physically something you had observed only from the second body. Next, I told about the table and the large white cards. His wife was excited at this one. It seemed that for the first time in 2 years, because they had all risen late, she had brought the morning mail to the breakfast table and had passed out the letters to them as she sorted the mail. Large white playing cards. They were very excited over the event, and I am sure they were not humoring me. In this morning visit to Mr. Bonson and his family, the time of visit coincides with the actual events. Autosuggestion hallucination, negative. No conscious intent of visit, although unconscious motivation possible. Identical reports with conditions of actual events. 1. Son walking down the street, tossing ball in air. These are the things that he saw that were identical. 2. Mr. Bonson at the car. 3. Mr. Bonson's actions at the car. 4. The device he had at the car. 5. Actions of Mrs. Bonson at the table, the dealing of, quote, cards. 6. The card size and the white color. And 7. Dishes on the table. Again, remember, he's trying to rule out untruths. Possibility of unconscious pre-knowledge through earlier observation. In other words, I'll say it again. He visited the place, his unconscious took certain things in, and he's maybe telling himself that they're things that they're not. So this is what he's trying to rule in or out. So negative. The possibility of this is negative. Number 1, unaware of son's interest in baseball and not conscious of his basic activities. 2, negative, had no knowledge of Mr. Bonson's actions in morning around car, and reported action was not part of his daily routine. Number 3, negative. As indicated, such actions were not routine. The loading of the car thus could not be a part of his pre-observed habit patterns of Mr. Bonson. Number 4, indeterminate. It's possible that the device had been observed previously, but not in the location indicated. Number 5, negative. No part of pre-observation memory, as Mrs. Bonson did not make habit of such action. Sorting the mail at the table was an unusual event. So he didn't unconsciously know that she does that every morning, is what he's saying. Because they don't do that every morning. Number 6, negative. For reasons just given, coupled with no such habits and own life pattern of sorting mail at table, plus misinterpretation of action itself. And number 7, indeterminate. Pre-observation could have been applied here in relation to the Bonson family, as Ryder had taken breakfast there several times. In other words, he'd been there, eaten breakfast with them several times, so maybe there's certain things that his unconscious kind of made happen in that event. All right. October 12th, 1960. This one is at night. The results are so contradictory to what I believed that it must be reported in detail. In our attempt to find some answers anywhere, we had come in contact with Mr. M, who purportedly had mediumistic powers. Or Mrs. M, sorry. Another fake name, obviously. I have and still have the highest regard for her as a person of great kindness and integrity. However, in 2 sittings in which we participated, I came away with a definite impression that Mrs. M, although deeply sincere, was acting out of some form of split personality when she went into a trance. The, quote, guides who took over her body, and spoke through her vocal cords were to me nothing more or less than manifestations of this. This implied not that I thought Mrs. M deliberately created this illusion, but that it happened as a result of a self-induced hypnotic state, and she truly had no knowledge of what took place. And I was sure in no way was Mrs. M attempting to, quote, fake, and she wasn't and isn't that type of person. But what left me unconvinced was that when I asked her guides, her dead husband, and an American Indian certain questions as they spoke through her, I received evasive answers. The best I could get was, "You will discover this through your own sources." This at the time seemed to me to be a simple way to avoid an answer that could be verified in other ways. It's important that I point out my complete skepticism of Mrs. M and her guides. Yet what happened last night and the report today utterly confuses me. R.G., a friend of Mrs. M, had suggested that I attempt to visit a seance to be held by Mrs. M in a New York apartment Friday night, which he's quoting here is last night. I have agreed, stating that I certainly wasn't sure that it was possible. I half agreed. Frankly, when Friday night came, the meeting had slipped my mind, consciously at least. Here's what took place, though. After a normal evening at home, my wife and I went up to bed around 11:30. My wife fell asleep almost immediately, as I could tell from her steady, deep breathing. As I lay there, evidently deeply relaxed and possibly half asleep, I suddenly felt that walking over your grave coldness, and the hairs on the back of my neck started to rise. I looked across the half-darkened room, fearful yet utterly fascinated. I don't know what I expected, but standing in the doorway, leading from the hall, was a white, ghost-like figure. It actually looked like the traditional figure of a ghost, some 6 feet tall as it stood there, with a flowing sheet-like material draping from its head to the floor. One hand was reaching out and holding onto the door jamb. I was completely frightened, and I had no chance to connect the figure with anything I had done. The moment it began to move towards me, I cringed in half-terror, at the same time felt I had to see what it was. Almost immediately I felt hands placed over my eyes so I couldn't see, and I kept pulling the hands away in spite of my fear. This sounds like a freaking nightmare, doesn't it? I kept pulling the hands away in spite of my fear until finally the ghost-like form was beside the bed, not a foot away from me. Then someone took hold of my upper arms gently, and I moved up out of the bed. With this, I calmed down, evidently because I felt that whatever it was friendly. I didn't struggle or resist, and immediately there was a quick sense of movement, and I then felt there were 2 of them on each side, were suddenly over a small room, as if we were looking down on it from the ceiling. In the room below were 4 women, and I looked at the 2 beings on each side of me, and one was a blonde male, the other a dark-haired, almost oriental. Both seemed to be quite young, in their early 20s, and they were smiling at me. I spoke to them and said they would have to excuse my attitude, as I was uncertain of what I was doing. And then I floated down to the only empty chair and sat down in it. A tall, large woman in a dark suit sat opposite of me. A woman in what looked like an ankle-length white robe sat next to me, and the other 2 were indistinct. A woman's voice asked if I would remember that I had been there, and I assured her that I certainly would. Another woman said something about cancer, but that's all I could get. Shit's getting weird, isn't it? Then one of the women, the one in the dark suit, came over and swung over the side of my chair and draped herself right on top of me. I didn't feel her weight, but for some reason she got up suddenly. There was laughter, but my mind was on other things. Evidently the contact with the woman who sat on top of me had altered things, and just at that moment I heard a male voice said, "I think he's been away long enough. We'd better take him back." I was torn between going and staying, but didn't argue. Almost instantly, I was back lying in my bed, and that was it, except that my wife had been awake during the entire time. She stated that I alternately gasped, made moaning and whimpering noises, and then seemed to do little or no breathing at all. Other than that, she hadn't seen or heard anything, except that our cat asleep in the room had awakened and had been extremely nervous. Yeah, I bet the cat saw that shit, right? My wife was quite upset and worried, and I'm sure I would have been too if I had gone through the same with her. This quote meeting certainly deserved checking, so I phoned RG and discovered several things. First, there were 4 women at the seance, and at my request, they were gathered together at the same apartment, very small living room, wearing the same clothes. The woman in the dark suit was of identical build as I saw, and she inadvertently sat in the chair reserved for me. This had taken place later in the evening after 11:30, when the seance had been long over. And the 4 were sitting around talking. The tall woman had jumped up out of my chair, and he puts my chair, when the rest called out, "Don't sit on Bob." They laughed at the joke, and one of the other women had worn a long white housecoat. The words about my remembering were not spoken orally. That supermind communication again, I guess. But one of the women had stated she was working at a cancer memorial hospital the following day. I remember he said, I heard someone say the word cancer, but I couldn't make out what they were talking about. I had met the other 2 women previously, Mrs. M and RG, but these 2 herein described were then strangers to me. 4 women, the clothes of 2, the build of 1. the sitting in the chair and the sitting on top of me and jumping up, the laughter, the small room, the quote cancer reference, that's too much coincidence even for me. And beyond the ability to hallucinate that properly, now I'm convinced. But the two men, does Mrs. M truly communicate with her dead husband and an Indian? I didn't know until afterward that he had been a blonde, and I must be less of a skeptic and more open-minded with Mrs. M now. In the visit to the apartment time coincides with the physical event. Autosuggestion hallucination indeterminate, as idea of the trip may have been retained unconsciously, although no conscious attempt was made. Identical reports with conditions of actual events. 1. The size of the room. 2. The number of women present were 4. 3. The empty chair. These are the things he identified while he was out of body that he did not know about. 4. The apparel of these two women. 5. This cancer mention. 6. The action of women sitting in a chair. 7. The laughter attitude of the group. Here's the possibility of unconscious pre-knowledge through earlier observation of the above. 1. Negative. No previous visits or descriptions of the apartment. 2. Indeterminate. RG may have revealed number of people to be present. So his unconscious might have took that in, and he just didn't consciously remember it. 3. Negative idea of empty chair came to group only during that same evening. 4. Negative. Had never met women before nor observed their dress. 5. Negative. For same reason just given. Would have no knowledge of unknown woman's work at Cancer Memorial Hospital. 6. Negative, as action was unplanned. And 7. Negative, as reaction of others was spontaneous. So here's like three cases of notes already where he's tapping into stuff that he's seeing that are identical to, the stuff that he just wouldn't have known about. There's no way he would have known about it. But the whole, the weird thing is this, to me, that's cool, but the weirdest thing about that thing is the seance. So they go do this seance, and he sees a ghost in his door, take him to this, quote, seance place, but in the astral realm. Witnesses all the stuff, most of the stuff that's actually happening in the physical. So I wonder who was the ghost that was guiding him there. That's weird. Let me see. Quick note here. Okay. We'll do one more, then I got to run to the restroom here. So August 15th, 1963 in the afternoon. Out of this crazy, another thing that's crazy to me is out of these 4 different OBE experiences he's talking about, there was only one of these that's actually at night, at a nighttime time. 8:15:63 afternoon. A productive experiment after a long layoff. RW, a businesswoman who I know quite well through long work association and a close friend, aware of my activities, but somewhat skeptical still in spite of rather unwilling participation, has been away this week on her vacation up on the New Jersey coast. I do not know exactly where she is vacationing other than that. Nor did I inform her of any planned experiment simply because I hadn't thought of it until today, which is Saturday. This afternoon, I laid down to renew experimentation, and I decided I would make a strong effort to visit RW wherever she was. Rule 1 in my case always has been that I am most successful going to someone I know well, and the opportunity does not come up too often. So I lay down in the bedroom about 3 in the afternoon, went into a relaxation pattern, felt the warmth and this high order of vibrations, and then thought heavily of the desire to go to RW. There was the familiar sensation of movement through a light blue blurred area. Then I was in what seemed to be in a kitchen. RW was seated in a chair to the right. She had a glass in her hand, and she was looking to my left, where 2 girls about 17 or 18, one blonde and one brunette, also were sitting, each with glasses in their hands, drinking something. The 3 of them were in conversation, but I could not hear what they were saying. I first approached the 2 girls, directly in front of them, but I could not attract their attention. I then turned to RW, and I asked if she knew I was there. "Oh, yes, I know you're here," she replied, mentally or with some superconscious communication, as she was still in oral conversation with the 2 girls. So he heard like a separate voice kind of saying, "Oh, yeah, I know. I'll remember." I asked if she was sure that she would remember that I had been there. "Oh, no, I'll definitely remember," the reply came. I said that this time I was going to make sure that she remembered. No, I will remember. I'm sure I will," RW said, still in oral conversation simultaneously with the other conversation. I stated that I had to be sure she would remember, so I was going to pinch her. "Oh, no, you needn't do that. I'll remember," RW said hastily. I said I had to be sure, so I reached over and tried to pinch her gently. I thought I pinched her in the side, just above the hips and below the rib cage. She let out a good "ow," and I backed up because I was somewhat surprised. I really hadn't expected to be able to pinch her. Satisfied that I had made some impression, at the least, I turned and left the thought of the physical and was back almost immediately. I got up physically and went over to the typewriter where I am now. RW will not be back until Monday, and I can determine if I made the contact or if it was another unidentifiable miss. Time of return, 3:35. Important aftermath. It is Tuesday after the Saturday of the experiment. RW returned to work yesterday, and I asked her what she had been doing Saturday afternoon between 3 and 4. Knowing my reason for asking, she said she would have to think about it and let me know on Tuesday, which is today. And here is what she reported today. On Saturday between 3 and 4 was the only time there was not a crowd of people in the beach cottage where she was staying. And for the first time, she was alone with her niece, dark-haired, about 18, and the niece's friend, about the same age, a blonde. And they were in the kitchen dining area of the cottage from about 3:15 to 4. And she was having a drink, and the girls were having Cokes. They were doing nothing but sitting and talking. I asked RW if she remembered anything else, and she said no. I questioned her more closely, but she could not remember anything more. Finally, in impatience, I asked her if she remembered the pinch, and a look of complete astonishment crossed her face. "Excuse me, was that you?" She stared at me for a moment, then went into the privacy of my office, turned and lifted, just slightly, the edge of her sweater where it jointed her skirt on her left side. There were 2 brown and blue marks exactly at the spot where I'd pinched her. "I was sitting there, talking to the girls," RW said, "when all of a sudden I felt this terrible pinch. I must have jumped a foot. I thought my brother-in-law had came back and sneaked up behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there, and I never had any idea it was you. It hurt." I apologized for pinching her so hard, and she obtained from me a promise that if I tried any such thing again, I would try something other than a pinch that hard. In this episode, the time coincides with the actual events. Autosuggestion, hallucination, indeterminate, as willful desire was suggested, and pre-knowledge was present of general location of RW at the time. Identical reports with conditions of actual events. So here he's saying the autosuggestion hallucination, which is something we do psychologically sometimes, is indeterminate because he knew he had a desire to go see the woman. And he also knew about where she was located, which to me isn't that big of a deal, but he's still notating it here. But here are some identical reports with the conditions of the actual events. 1, the location, inside rather than outside. You got to take that into consideration. He was right about that. 2, the number of people present. 3, the description of the girls was accurate. 4, the actions of the people present was also accurate. 5, the acknowledgement of the pinching. And 6, physical marks from pinching. Possibility of unconscious pre-knowledge through earlier observation of the above, negative. Pre-knowledge implied activity outdoors on beach rather than indoors, because his mind kind of thought that's where she would be. 2, negative. Pre-knowledge implied adults in group, as RW was visiting sister and brother-in-law. But he didn't know who was actually going to be with her. And 3, negative, indeterminate. Possibility of pre-knowledge of niece and her hair color through RW. Sometime previously, negative as to friend of niece, her hair color and age. 4, negative, no pre-knowledge of non-existent habit pattern for the particular moment of the day. 5 is also negative. RW had no pre-knowledge of experimental attempt, as no such attempt had been made previously, nor was experimenting in the habit of pinching RW had not done so previously. And 6, negative, no possible way that RW would have known where pinch marks should have occurred to confirm with the area reported. The incidents may have been simple and unimportant in themselves, but as minute pieces in a mosaic, they were vital. The emerging pattern through the glimpses of the whole was made believable and acceptable to me only through the inclusion of hundreds of such scraps of evidence. Perhaps it may be to you, too. There's so many freaking trippy things about that, man. So many. Like, when did I start this? I think we can do one more chapter, I think. But I've got to run to the restroom. Like, now, you know. Yeah, like right now. And then we'll do another chapter too. But I want to talk about this pinching thing. Like, if you guys have seen that movie Ghost about Patrick Swayze, it's kind of makes that whole incident where that guy's trying to teach him how to move stuff real, doesn't it? From your gut. Anyways, we'll be right back. Yeah. It's hard not to like Sade, right? Man, if you don't like Sade's music, I don't know. I don't know if I want to talk to you. All right, welcome back. Welcome back to Lighting the Void. We're going to get back into one more chapter. This one's called The Here and Now. Dude, this, so... Remember, I have a theory about this, by the way. Like, when you get out of body and you talk to people, why they can't remember any of the conversations. And here in this last one where he talked about, he was having a conversation with this RW, this woman who was having this conversation separately from the other conversation she was having. So I think there's a second body that communicates, even though he pinched her physical body, which is another freaking trippy thing. Because I remember when I got out, I went to my, like, I don't want to go to some other places like bedroom. It's creepy. But I did go to my dad's room while he was sleeping because I figured that's harmless. And I was like super stoked, right? So I remember saying, hey, you know, Dad, I did it. Like, I did it. And he would talk back to me. Of course, he still doesn't remember it, but to this day. But he did talk back to me. He was like, yeah, so what are you doing? I said, well, I'm standing here. That's what I said. I'm standing here. And he goes, wow, sarcastically, just like my pop would, you know. And that was it. And I remember asking him, like, do you remember saying that, like, in a dream or anything at all? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I wonder what would have happened if I'd have pinched him or smacked him or something. If it would have turned out different, you know? All right, so let's get into this. Chapter 4, the here now. One of the most common questions that arises during any discussion of the second body and the second state is, where do you go? So in evaluation of all experiments, there evolved what seemed to be 3 second state environments. The first of these was identified as locale 1, for lack of a better nomenclature, and more appropriately, it could be called the here now. Locale 1 is the most believable. It consists of people and places that actually do exist in the material. Well-known world, this material well-known world at the very moment of the experiment. It is the world represented to us by our physical senses, which most of us are fairly sure does exist. Visits to locale 1, while in the second body, should not contain strange beings, events, or places, unfamiliar perhaps, but not strange and unknown. If the latter is the case, then perception is distorted. Thus, it is the only evidential results provable by standard methods of confirmation have taken place while moving about via the second state in locale 1. All the other experiments in Chapter 3 were made in locale 1, and even so, these and others in the same category are pitifully few in proportion to all the recorded experiments. On the surface, it seems quite simple. Get out of the physical and into the second, then go to visit George and make contact. Come back into the physical and report it. Nothing to it. If only it were that easy. Yet the factors present that make it difficult are recognizable. Recognition of a problem presumes an eventual solution one way or another, and perhaps it will be so in this field. Let us take the first factors of direction and identification. Suppose, for example, fully conscious and in your physical body, you were able to soar through the air, then walk on the ground, or ride in a car. In other words, let's pretend for a moment you could fly in your body. You discovered this ability and decided to fly over to George's house to demonstrate how it works. Your house or your laboratory is on the outskirts of a large city. George lives in a subdivision on the other side of town. On a sunny afternoon, you start off. Naturally, you rise high in the air so as to avoid obstacles of trees, buildings, etc. And uncertain, you don't go too high. You want to be able to recognize landmarks which might be difficult to see from 5,000 feet. Therefore, you stay low, about 100 feet off the ground. Now, which way do you go? You look for points of familiarity. It is at this moment you realize you have a problem. You don't have a compass course to George's house, and it wouldn't do you any good if you did. You don't have a compass. Undaunted, you decide to cut across the city using the familiar buildings and streets as guideposts. You've driven the route many times in your car, so you should find this pretty easily. You start over the houses and streets, and almost immediately you become confused. The familiar has suddenly become unfamiliar. You look back and you have difficulty finding your own house, even at close range. It takes a moment to realize why this is so. You have been earthbound. You've been walking upright on the ground. And your entire point of view has been from a level of less than 6 feet, unless you're 6 foot tall. Most of the time, we habitually look straight ahead or downward. Only occasionally do we look up, and when something attracts our attention, we'll look up. But even such an upward-looking angle of vision has little relationship to looking down from 100 feet. So how long would it take for you to be able to recognize your own home if you were shown a photograph taken from directly overhead? The same applies to all familiar surroundings, streets, buildings, cities, and people. You may get to George's house, but it will take you a long time, and you may not identify it from a distance of 50 feet because you know only the appearance of the front of his house and you approach it from the back. It is not a failing peculiar to you. Pilots of aircraft, their attention diverted for a moment, have become lost with 2 miles of the airport when flying at low level in bright daylight. For a moment, everything below is completely unfamiliar. Only navigational instruments can bring the quick orientation needed. It's easy to see how this problem can be compounded when your friend George lives in another city a long ways away, where you have never visited, and when you have not seen pictures of the house. Yeah, I remember I was dating this girl, and we were talking about this all the time. I was like, I'm going to get out of body and come visit you. And I do remember, like, I couldn't even get down the road, man. I could get out, but I couldn't get down the road. Of course, if he painted a fluorescent yellow X on the roof with a 10 million candle power beacon of light with similar markers on the streets and highways along the route, you just might make it. Now let's take the same trip in the second body and examine it comparatively. Again, you are overhead 100 feet, floating in the air, this time with no physical body. It is a bright sunny day, but your seeing is somewhat impaired because you're out of body. You still are not fully accustomed to the technique of how you are seeing because you're not in your body and you don't have eyeballs. As a result, your vision is distorted in one way or another. Now, you can work your way slowly from over your house to George's house much as you would in the physical body. It would be the same slow process under less favorable visual conditions. There is a better, faster way. Happily, there seems to be a built-in directional sense as if their use can be mastered. The if is the catch, though. As noted elsewhere, you think of that person at the end of your destination, never a place, but a person, and use the method described. In a few moments, you're there. You can watch the landscape move under you if you wish, but it's a little disconcerting when you rush heading towards a building or a tree and go right through it. So in order to avoid such traumas, forget about seeing during the traveling process. You never quite get over the physical body conditioning that such things are solid. At least I haven't. And I still have the tendency to move into the direction of the door to leave, only to realize again the situation when my second body hand goes through the doorknob. Irritated with myself, I then dive through the wall rather than the door to reinforce my awareness of the second body characteristics. I have experience in that too. You always go straight for the door because it's just natural to you to walk towards the door, you know. What's up, Zaya? Tools for navigation in spirit like the golden compass, wit, and the lantern of knowledge. Yeah. Well, I mean, like what he's saying is when you first start getting out of body, flying is the thing that you want to. You want to fly, man, and so you fly up in the air, and when you look down upon stuff, it's hard to recognize where you're at. But he also is talking about here, you don't even have to do all that. You can just think of the person and then let your unconscious or your soul, whatever it is, take you there, whatever you want to call it. April 12th, 1963, late afternoon. This is crazy. It's still not at night. The temperature in the 40s. The humidity was low, but the barometer was high. I utilized countdown technique, and a warm sensation surged in on 31 count, and disassociated easily under plan to visit a friend. Used stretch-out method and seemed to travel unusually long for a 3-mile trip, and then I stopped. I looked to see where I was, and I found I was sitting on the edge of the roof of a 2-story house with what seemed to be the backyard below me. There was a woman working in the yard with a broom in her hand, and as I watched, she turned to walk into the house, and just as she was about to enter, something made her look up directly at me. And with a frightened start, she scuttled into the house, slamming the door. I felt that I should leave, embarrassed at having frightened the woman. So, like, holy shit, man. He's sitting on someone's roof, and this lady saw his astral body. He don't even know where he is. I used the physical movement, return signal, and came back easily, entering the physical without difficulty. Time away, 7 minutes, 10 seconds. I wonder what she saw sitting on the eave. Also, why this destination? Evidently concentration failure again, I guess. Another event, June 29th, 1960, late evening. The temperature was in the 70s, humidity medium, barometer average. I was physically tired. Blood flow surge came at hold-off point before sleep, under plan to visit Dr. Andrea Puharich, I think is her name, Andrea Puharich, somewhere in California. I moved blindly for a short period, then stopped. 4 people were seated around a table, 3 men and a boy of about 11. Obviously not Dr. Puharich, unless unusual situation. I asked where they were and what was the location, town, or state. There was no answer to my query, and I sensed wariness and caution on their parts. I asked again, and the boy turned and evidently was about to reply when one of the men said, "Don't tell him." Evidently, they were afraid of me for some reason, so I apologized for my nervousness and explained I was still new to the non-physical business, and I turned and left, not wishing to make them uncomfortable. So he's running into people now in the astral realm. Either that, or he's running into, like, physical people. That's weird, right? So I apologized for my nervousness and explained I was still new to the non-physical business, turned and left, not wishing to make them uncomfortable, returned to physical, uneventful. Time away, 18 minutes. No connection with Dr. Puharich's activities at the time, as he reports. Wrong destination again. No validation possible. Why does my presence create such fear? Second time. So this is the second time he's trying to get to somebody, gets disoriented, ends up around some other people. They can see him, and they're afraid of him. This inability to control destination has been and still remains the chief barrier to the production of consistency and repeatability. The results of such attempts have brought many intrusions similar to the above, and many follow a similar pattern. Here's one that brought evidential data, although the persons involved were and unaware of their participation. November 27th, 1962, in the morning. The temperature was in the 40s. The humidity was medium, barometer below average. Physically rested. Went into relaxation countdown. Used sex center mental pattern with oral breathing to create condition. He doesn't really go into detail what that means, but used peel off to get out of body, just as if the outer layer of physical were being removed, then free and floating in the room. Plan was to go to Agnew Bonson. Started trip slowly to observe surroundings as much as possible. Went slowly through west wall, feeling texture of each layer of the material in the wall. Then into another room, furnished as a living room. Then into a third room, another living room, all unoccupied, and speed became faster. Nothing was visible but gray-black. It was a gray-black blur. Still concentrating on Mr. Bonson, finally stopped. Was in normal-sized bedroom, and 3 people in it. There was a large bed to the right, and 2 adults lay on it. A little girl, about 5 or 6, was sitting on the floor beside the bed, to the left of it. The little girl looked directly at me and said excitedly, "I know what you are." I turned to her as gently and warmly as I could, so I didn't frighten her, and said, "You do? Good. Well, what am I?" And she was not at all afraid when she said, "You're an astral projection." She may have used another term such as ghost, but it was definitely understanding on her part, one way or another. I asked her where she lived and what year it was, but she couldn't give me an answer, so I turned to the 2 in bed. I tried to be careful to avoid making them afraid or nervous, but it was obvious that they were. I asked them what year it was, but they didn't seem to understand. There was no time concept in the superconscious, maybe. I concentrated on the man and asked him his name and where he lived. He replied nervously, but I moved away as he became more disturbed and looked out the window for area identification. Outside the window was a small roof, such as over a porch, and beyond was a street with many trees and a grassy island strip in the middle. There was a car parked at the curb, a dark-colored sedan. I sensed a need to return to the physical and turn back to the 3 people. I asked if they would like to see me take off, and the little girl was eager, and the 2 adults appeared relieved. I used the stretch technique, shot up through the ceiling, and returned to the physical without problems. Reason for recall? My throat was dry from oral breathing. Time away, 42 minutes. That's a good one. The comment, through a check by phone, I have located this family at the address which the man gave me. would it be appropriate to visit them physically on some pretext? So this guy actually gave him his address. I don't think he ever called them to verify it, though. From this, it can be seen that much more extensive and organized effort would be required for massive validation of second body activities in Locale 1. One subject and several assorted scientists, head psychiatrists, and psychiatrists are not enough. Also, it can be noted that unexpected visits to unprepared people can't be helped at this stage of control. Perhaps much could be gained if such people could be interviewed as to what they saw and felt at the time of the intrusion. The difficulty lies in locating these people. It is the exception that enough data is obtained to identify the place visited, as in the above. Also, it's interesting when possible to determine the inconsistencies of observation of Locale 1 activities while in the second state. Except in unusual instances, most visual input registers in shadings of black and white. This seems true under any lighting conditions. However, strong light and shadow create wrong perception. For example, a strong light reflecting from the dark hair of a man brings the impression that he is blonde rather than dark. Here's some of the notes, for example. May 5th, 1961. Temperature was in the 60s, humidity high, barometer medium, physically neutral. After dinner, early evening, and planned attempt to Dr. Puharich used breathing jaw technique for relaxation. Obtained vibration state after some difficulty via 90-degree reach-out technique. He doesn't explain any of these techniques, by the way. He's just stating them in his notes. Applied simple mental lift-out and concentrated mental desire to visit Dr. Puharich after short trip stopped in room. There was a long, narrow table with several chairs and bookshelves. There was a man sitting at the table writing on paper. He resembled Dr. Puharich, but he was more light or blonde-haired. I greeted him, and he looked up and smiled, then stated that he would spend more time on our project, apologizing for being so neglectful. I said I understood, then felt uneasiness to return to the physical, and explained I had to leave. He stated that he realized my need for caution, and I turned and quickly headed back to the physical. I re-entered without difficulty, with right arm circulation down from lying on it, awkwardly, which was evident reason for recall. So his arm fell asleep, which made him come back to his body. In checking with Dr. Puharich, the locale was right and actions were correct, but he has no memory of the visit. Strong overhead light may have caused the reflection of the blonde hair. The proceeding also illustrates the problem of communication. Dr. Puharich, awake and aware that specific attempts to visit him were being made, had no conscious recollection of any such meetings. All other factors checked out accurately except for the reported, quote, conversation. This has happened so frequently in such instances that it became the source of much discussion. At first, it was suggested that I was fantasizing these communications, and it seemed probable that in doing so, I was merely calling up upon my knowledge of the visitee at the unconscious level to create an authentic conversation. The theory received a setback when a number of such communications brought out data known only to the second party. Still, another difficulty of Locale 1 travel lies in the time factor. Inconveniently, the best periods for deep relaxation so necessary to create the second state occur late at night. Therefore, it is quite natural to take advantage of such instances when possible. Less efforts required, and the separation is much more rapid. However, the physiological and psychological conditions that help induce the state are unpredictable and not known fully. This inconsistency brought numerous occasions when experimentation for purely evidential data ended in failure. The person to be visited was performing no reportable act other than lying in bed sound asleep. Yeah, I get that, right? So it's easy to get out of body, right? Like if he's trying to experiment, what he's saying is it's easy to get out of body late at night because that's when you're relaxed. But when he goes to get out of body, he can't really do much experiments with other people because they're all in bed asleep. Now, these were all discounted completely as evidence, and most of them perform this act of sleep every night. Also, attempts at validation during daylight hours brought their share of complications. With no promise of contact at a specific minute or hour, most people involved went about their normal affairs. Thus, when such visits were made, they were not necessarily discovered in a unique or unusual act or condition. And as a result, the small, normally inconsequential acts observed during these visits often were but vague memories to the contactee when the confirmation was needed. So basically, when he gets out of body, he goes visits these people. They're doing their normal daily routine. Then he goes back and asks them, what were they doing at this time? And they're like, man, I don't know. Like, maybe I was doing this or whatever, because they're just doing their normal day stuff. We have a great tendency to forget details of routine actions in life. You can prove this to yourself. Simply attempt to recall precisely in detail what you were doing at, say, 3:23 yesterday afternoon. Try it. If it was a routine task, chances are you will remember only doing that, if that much. You just remember doing something. Exact details will escape you. Yet the experimentation is visiting locale 1 is extremely important. Perhaps at the moment more so than anything else to be attempted. For only through evidential visits in locale 1 can sufficient evidential data on the second body and the second state be obtained. Maybe this is probably what Thomas Campbell should have said to Joe Rogan when Joe Rogan was like, well, why don't you do experiments and get out of body and show us that this stuff is real? Sufficient, that is, to bring about serious study by authoritative scientific groups of our time. Only through such concentrated and extensive study can a breakthrough of a revolutionary nature be obtained as regards the second body and applied to the basic knowledge of man. Anything less, and it will remain an unsolved enigma at best, and at worst, a ridiculed and unaccepted fantasy to both philosopher and scientist. For this reason, the recurring theme in the reports of experiments is get evidential data. Get some evidence, damn it. Here then is a later experiment in locale 1 I performed in the EEG laboratory of a hospital on a major university campus. Experiment number EEG number 5, July 19th, 1966. I arrived at the hospital EEG lab at 9 p.m. After driving 70 miles from Richmond, no particular sense of fatigue, sleepiness earlier in the day around 1 p.m., but no rest was taken. Active day from around 6:30 in the morning. By 9:30 in the evening, all electrodes had been attached by the technician, who was the only person present when I arrived. I reclined on a temporary cot in a semi-darkened room, using a pillow and a sheet, no shirt, but retained trousers. Thank God he kept his pants on, right? Experienced usual difficulty in getting head comfortable, especially the ear pressed against the pillow. As a side sleeper, it made no difference which side. Each was equally uncomfortable due to the electrodes attached to my ear. After a semblance of ease, I attempted to relax naturally, but was unsuccessful. I went finally into the fractional relaxation pattern. Count up from number 1, associated with each number with a body part, starting with the feet, fixing closed eyes in direction of body part as a number, and mental command to relax were thought. Experienced usual mind drift at various points and forced attention back to relaxation technique. Went through the entire sequence without completing relaxation, so I started again at the beginning. And after about 45 minutes of this without attaining full relaxation, I decided to take a break, sat up halfway, and called to the technician. I sat up partially, smoked a cigarette, and talked with the technician for about 5 or 8 minutes, then decided to try again. And after some time spent in attempting to ease this ear electrode discomfort, concentrated on ear to numb it with partial success, then went back into fractional relaxation technique again. Halfway through the second time around in the pattern, the sense of warmth appeared with full consciousness, or so it seemed, remaining. I decided to try the rollout method. I started to turn over gently, as just if you were turning over in bed using the physical body. I started to feel as if I were turning, and at first thought I truly was moving the physical body. I felt myself roll off the edge of the cot and brace for the fall to the floor. When I didn't hit immediately, I knew that I had separated. I moved away from the physical and through a darkened area, then came upon 2 men and a woman. The seeing wasn't too good, but it got better as I got closer. The woman, tall, dark-haired, in her 40s, maybe, was sitting on a love seat or a couch, and seated to the right of her was 1 man. In front of her and slightly to her left was the second man. They all were strangers to me and were in conversation which I could not hear. I tried to get their attention but couldn't, and finally I reached over and pinched the woman very gently, on her left side just below the rib cage. It seemed to get a reaction, but still no communication. I decided to return, he's still out pinching women. I decided to return the physical for orientation and start again. Back into the body was achieved simply by thought of return. I opened my eyes, and all was fine. I swallowed to wet my dry throat, closed my eyes, let the warmth surge up, and then used the same rollout technique. This time, I let myself float to the floor beside the cot. I fell slowly and could feel myself passing through the various EEG wires on the way down. I touched the floor lightly, then could see the light coming through the open doorway to the outer EEG rooms. Careful to keep local, I went under the cot, keeping in slight touch with the floor, and floating in a horizontal position. Fingertips touching the floor to keep in position, I went slowly through the doorway. I was looking for the technician, but could not find her. She was not in the room to the right, which were the control console room, and I went out into the brightly lighted outer room. I looked in all directions, and suddenly there she was. However, she was not alone. A man was with her, standing to her left as she faced me. I tried to attract her attention and was almost immediately rewarded with a burst of warm joy and happiness that I had finally achieved the thing we had been working for. She was truly excited and happily and excitedly embraced me, and I responded, and only slight sexual overtones were present, which I was nearly able to disregard. And after a moment, I pulled back and gently put my hands on her face, on one each cheek, and thanked her for her help. However, there was no direct, intelligent, objective communication with her other than the above. None was tried, as I was too excited at finally achieving the separation and staying local. I then turned to the man who was about her height, with curly hair, some of which drooped over the side of his forehead. I tried to attract his attention, but was unable to do so. Again, reluctantly, I decided to pinch her gently, which I did. It didn't evoke any response that I noticed, and feeling something calling for a return to the physical, I swung around and went through the door and slipped easily back into the physical. Reason for discomfort, dry throat, and a throbbing ear. After checking to see that the integration was complete, that I felt normal in all parts of the body, I opened my eyes, sat up, and called into the technician. And she came in, and I told her what I had made it, or that I had made it finally, and that I seen her, however, with a man. And she replied that it was her husband. I asked if he was outside, and she replied that he was, and that he came to stay with her during these late hours. I asked why I hadn't seen him before, and she replied that it was policy for no outsiders to see subjects of our patients. I expressed the desire to meet him, to which she acceded. The technician removed the electrodes, and I went outside with her and met her husband. He was about her height, curly-haired, and after several conversation amenities, I left. I did not query the technician on her husband as to anything they saw, noticed, or felt. However, my impression was that he definitely was the man I had observed with her during the non-physical activity. My second impression was that she was not in the console room when I visited them, but in another room, standing up with him. This may be hard to determine if there is a firm rule that the technician is supposed to always be at the console. If she can be convinced that the truth is more important in this case, perhaps the second aspect can be validated. Yeah, she don't want to get in trouble and say, oh, it wasn't at the console. But the only supporting evidence other than what might have appeared on the EEG lies in the presence of the husband, of which I was unaware prior to the experiment. This latter fact can be verified by the technician. Important aftermath. In a report to Dr. Tart, the technician confirmed that she was in the outer hall with her husband at the time of the indicated, quote, separation. She also confirmed that I did not know he was present and that I had not met him previously. Dr. Tart states that the EEG shows definite, unusual, and unique tracing during the time of activity. Damn. So this is exciting stuff to me. Like, he's still getting out of body. But that chapter is weird. It seemed like when he, so he's having a hard time trying to get relaxed in this laboratory that they are doing these experiments with. It's also cool that he's getting some support, that people want to do these experiments with him. But it is weird, like he seemed to be like he was like crawling maybe, or trying to stay close to the floor as he was moving around. I don't know. And he keeps trying to pinch these girls, doesn't he? So we went through 3 chapters tonight. Probably need to jump off. I don't want to do a 4th, but we'll keep going through this book and keep talking about it. I love doing this again because it's like interacting with you while we do this. For some reason, I'm taking in every little word more than I would out of the 100 times I've listened to it on Audible or whatever. But listen on Audible and the book. Thank you guys for coming out and for your support. I hope you guys are fascinated with this as I am. What's up, Flux Capacitor? Great radio voice, man. Love this channel. Cigarettes and coffee and radio processing will get it for you, or the mic processing. James. Thanks for coming out anyways. All right. That's about 2 hours, 3 chapters in 2 hours. I want to keep going, man. I feel like I could read this book all night with you guys. But unfortunately, you know, we got to sleep. Some of us got to try to get out of body. Some of us probably are asleep while I'm talking right now. Anywho. Let's get the hell out of here, huh? We'll do it again. You know what? I'm no promises, but I'd like to do another few chapters before the weekend's up. Y'all take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Night, sweet dreams.
Tombstones climbing up the sky to claim the boredom and the whine of the radiator, to freeze the fates that intertwine, unresolved and undefined in this echo chamber. Just like Lazarus, you know there's an operator, some strange passenger inside. To that strange power I'm resigned like an iron anchor. I'm just a ghost in your stereo, the fading memory of a shipwreck in the undertow. You're just a lost song I wrote, and I'm just a ghost in your stereo.